All right. Welcome back to another episode of the MiniBrute Cookbook tutorial series that I'm doing. Today's episode is the Metalized Bass by J.M. Blanchett. This is a bass sound using the Metalizer, modulated by LFO2. Try this sound with a sequencer or an arpeggio. Sounds a little something like this. Something like that. Now, this is what I got. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is, the end-all be-all. This is how it's supposed to be. But, so I have mine set up into an arpeggio already. But that's the arpeggiator that's built into the MiniBrute 2S. If you have the keyboard version, I'm not sure if there's an arpeggiator in that already. To start with, as always, let's get back to a basic patch, with nothing going on. This is always the most horrifying part of making these videos, because it's like, what if I can't get back to the exact sound I was at? Well, that's kind of the fun of the thing, right? Is the whole experimentation and kind of figure it out aspect, right? Okay, so I'm not going to touch the LFO2 because it's pretty close to where it needs to be, and it doesn't in its default state, so we don't really have to do much with it. Okay, so to start off with, as always, we need sound, right? So we're going to take our triangle wave, bring it up a little bit. Still nothing, because our cutoff is too low, right? Well, oh, sorry, we're still in arpeggio mode. Let me turn that off. All right, so now we got sound, right? But our filter needs to stay closed. Why does our filter need to stay closed? Well, because we're going to open it up with this, right? So the filter frequency modulation's got to come up, so we can use the ADSR envelope that's pre-wired to handle all this, okay? So put up a little bit of decay, maybe, a quarter of the way up. Sustain will be almost 2/3. Release, just a little under that. And this is all to taste. You'll want to play around with it as you go. And when you start to go using it in your compositions, you'll want to adjust the sound to kind of match what you're trying to do with it. But then we can start bringing up the AD envelope for the actual sound, and you just want that to be just a little bit longer than your cutoff release. That way, like, this sound still generates long enough to be cut back off by the filter. Okay, so let's get back to that filter for a second. We're also going to do some fun stuff with it. We're going to add some resonance to it. Now, the book tells you to put a lot, and then bring your resonance modulation down. Trouble with that is it's pre-wired to LFO1, and just kind of, if you leave it in the default state, you hear how sometimes it gets so resonant that you get that like really piercing sort of resonant overtone. So what I like to do is I actually like to back off the resonance itself just a little bit, just to about halfway, a little bit more than that maybe, and then turn the resonance modulation down. Just kind of keep going back up with it. You'll notice, it's hard to see, but you'll notice the light on the LFO1 as it moves. You see, when the LFO gets to its lowest point, it like the resonance frequency is just right to just take off like that, right? So you kind of got to play around with that to get it where you want it. But that's not even the core of the sound. That's just kind of like a little bit of flavor that we put on top, a little bit of seasoning. The real core of the sound comes from the Metalizer and the relationship between VCO2. So let's go back to VCO1 here for a second. Let's get this Metalizer turned up. That sounds a bit more exciting. You can also hear that resonance in the filter a lot easier, okay? So we're gonna have to go back and adjust that. But for right now, now we have the metal modulation. We turn that up a little bit, and it's pre-wired to the velocity. So the harder you hit the note, and you can kind of hear it. The harder I hit it, the more it kind of like, the metallization gets a little bit deeper into it, right? However, we don't want that to work like that. What we're going to do actually is take the LFO2 and put that into the metal modulation, right? So now LFO2 is taking the place of the pressure that I was putting into the pad. Now, if I turn it way up, you can kind of hear it when I turn it up. It's sort of subtle in the background, right? If it just kind of hold the note out. But as you play the note, each note will sound a little bit differently, and it'll be a little more expressive in the way that it comes out that way. So that's what that's for. Now we're also going to add just a little bit of FM to LFO, or to the oscillator 1. And that's just to add a little bit more sort of kind of character to the sound. But we're also supposed to add VCO2, which we have not done yet. So let's bring that up. That's a little out of tune, so I'm going to tune it. But I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be an octave lower based on what the diagram says. So and of course, I'm just tuning by ear, so I don't know that you know, that just because I'm playing E, it might be an F or a D sharp. I don't know. So once we have the LFO2, or I'm sorry, oscillator 2 added into the mix, we want to make sure it's not overpowering everything, because we want that kind of like metalized sort of sound to it. And at this point, we're almost done. So the only thing we have left to do, which I'm not exactly sure why it needs to happen, to be honest with you, because there's a knob for it. So I don't know. But you can turn up attenuator 1 cutoff for the pressure modulation. So you can control the cutoff based on how hard you're pushing the pressure pad. And you can actually control that, right? So now, because that's pre-wired into the sequencer on the sequencer version, you can program the pressure lane, the pressure track, to do different stuff. So you can actually make the filter open and close based on the sequencer. And eventually I'll do a series on like how to use the sequencer and all that kind of stuff. But the book describes using modulation 2, the pressure modulation 2 from the MIDI output into attenuator 1, or the cutoff, right? Or yeah. Now if I turn this down, it still does the same thing, but now I don't have control over the pressure modulation. So for me, I like to, if I'm going to use this sound, I'll use the built-in, you know, wiring for that, because it just seems to work a little bit better, right? So the last step, the last thing we need to add to this is just a little bit of brute factor. And you'll hear that whistle. That's your resonance from the filter being resonated through the brute factor. See, they're both basically feedback filters. That's how a resonance filter works on a cutoff. Or not a feedback filter, it's a feedback loop. And depending on where the cutoff filter frequency is, depends on where the resonance is going to catch. So, you know, it's kind of one of those, you have to be careful with it, because, you know, if you've ever added feedback in a delay, like a delay unit, and then, you know, you add too much feedback and then it just delays forever and then you can't get it to friggin' stop. Like, that's kind of the same idea of what's happening here, except it's the same frequency of tone just sort of stacking on itself, and the harmonics of that tone stack on itself. And that's where you get your resonance from. And that's what we want to try to avoid getting too crazy with, because that, obviously that kind of makes the sound a little harsh and a little hard to use. But if you get the resonance and the RM set just right, you can really get it how you want it. And then you can adjust LFO1 to adjust how long it takes to sweep between those sort of timbre changes in the metalizer, right? So, you can really have some fun with this one and really find some cool sounds. It's just, you got to be careful with that resonance, that it doesn't take off and make things, hard to use. So the last step is to put the arpeggiator back on. So that's interesting. I just discovered something about this too. So if you have the sequencer model, right? If you are playing an arpeggio, it will take the pressure from the highest pressure held note, and that will be the pressure that it uses for this, right? So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to hold down the D and the F keys, pads, whatever you want to call them, and I'm going to let up on the F pad until it just stops playing, but I'm going to hold the D pad down until, like, as hard as I can, and you'll hear that nothing's going to change. Except that eventually the F key turns off because I'm not hitting it hard enough for it to register anymore. Now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to release the pressure on both pads as equally as I can, given the fact that I have two different hands here, right? And you could hear how the filter like closed as I let up. Until eventually it was, again, I was holding so lightly that it didn't register anymore, and it let go of the note. So, as you can see, you can have a lot of fun with this patch, and it's very expressive. Try it on a sequence, try it on an arpeggio, try it as sort of a background building sort of a thing, and then it kind of like builds up to what you want it to be. Get creative with it. As always, experiment, have fun, be creative, be a good person, and we'll catch you in the next one.